Hey everyone, and welcome to part 2 of a 3-part series where we'll be analyzing how LCS players navigate teamfights in Challenger YOLO. Since every teamfight can be unique, unless both teams repeatedly run it down mid, we'll be focusing on both the core fundamentals that the pros are playing by and the tricks that they use to gain an edge. Before we go over this good old-fashioned solo queue fight, let's establish a few missions every AD carry should follow when teamfighting and that Doublelift will display in this fight. Mission 1, play around vision. Mission 2, play around your front line. And mission 3, play around your range. This last one might be a new concept for most of you, so here's a quick explanation. It basically just means try to attack from your max range and to keep that distance between you and your enemy. For example, if they walk up as you're throwing out a Q, you'd want to walk backward as you wait for your next Q instead of holding your ground and autoing. So, in this video, Doublelift starts off getting 4v2'd from both of his flanks in what eventually becomes a full-on 5v5. First, let's roll the clip. Alright, so that wasn't the cleanest ending, but otherwise Doublelift handled that beautifully. Before we dive into the play-by-play breakdown, let's go over an initial analysis of this fight. Starting off, Doublelift and Pyke are overextended at mid and get collapsed on by the enemy team. We'll go into the details about this later, but the biggest reason Doublelift escaped that collapse so cleanly is because he positioned around his vision. If he hadn't, he almost certainly would have gotten clipped by the Air God. As for the actual fight, it's crucial that Ezreal starts by positioning behind his frontliners while throwing Qs from a distance in teamfights. Here's why. For one, the enemy has strong skirmishers, Kai'Sa, Victor, Urgot, and Graves, that can outtrade an Ezreal at this point of the game. Victor's burst is especially a threat. You don't want to get caught auto-queuing within his max range and catching a laser and an ult for it. Ezreal's squishing has weak autos early game, so any prolonged trades, or a couple seconds from the Victor, will wreck Ezreal's health pool for little gain. On the other hand, the enemy team is also relatively squishy, and Doublelift's team has strong frontliners in Vlad, Hecarim, and Sion. Compositionally, they should be able to wreak havoc on the enemy and force him to kite away, but if Doublelift dies or gets too low to deal damage, his team might lack the DPS to finish their dive and could end up getting wiped. In fact, the enemy team's easiest win condition is to kill Ezreal before his frontline wrecks them all. In other words, as Ezreal in this particular game, with these particular team comps, there's no reason to prioritize maximizing your DPS with Qs and autos when you can let your team do the work for you. If he has no front line, Ezreal should focus on running and putting distance between himself and the enemy to throw Qs. With distance and or a front line, he outranges their team and can poke freely with Q, eventually closing the distance to throw in autos as the fight turns around, and outside Victor's max range if he isn't dead yet. Okay, nice we made it through the intro. Let's get into this sick gameplay. Ezreal and Pyke start off pushing the mid wave up to tower. This is risky because the enemy has both the top and bot mini waves pushed in, meaning their laners are free to collapse on our heroes at mid while Doublelift's team catches those side waves. If he wants to pressure the mini wave and get out cleanly, Doublelift has to stay positioned towards his top side vision control as opposed to the bottom side of mid lane where he has no vision. By playing to his vision here, Doublelift puts himself in the position to succeed in a couple ways. First, he maximizes the distance between himself and a gank from his blind side, in this case bottom. This helps to buy precious seconds to dodge, reposition, and kite back, as opposed to if he was positioned in the bottom or center of the lane. It may not seem like much, but this concept of positioning towards your vision, if you have any, is super translatable to every mini wave at mid lane. Whether you're just clearing waves, baiting a gank, sieging towers, or defending a siege yourself, you should almost always try to position towards your vision control and away from theirs. Anyway, his jungler is also on the top side of the map, so if things get hairy, he has less distance to cover when kiting back to regroup with Hecarim. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there. I just get really excited about vision and playing around it. Let's get back to the gameplay. So Doublelift walks the wave up to the tower, looking to poke with Pike. Seconds later, he's getting collapsed from both sides. Just to prove a point real quick, if Ezreal was positioned anywhere in mid besides his top side, there's pretty much no way he escapes the ghosted Urgot here, especially since he's overextended enough to get cut off from his tower. Way to play around mission 1, Doublelift. Moving on, Doublelift immediately starts running up and away from the Urgot, who uses a sick E flash that Doublelift clearly wasn't ready for. Luckily, Pike takes the bullet as Doublelift ease away into a stray Kai'Sa W. Alright, I have a question for you, the viewers, here. If you were Ezreal right now, having just used your E and seeing Kai'Sa nearby, how would you play out your escape? That was a bit of a trick question. Let's roll the clip for a couple seconds to see what Doublelift does. If we're gonna be picky, it looked like Doublelift might have had a chance to fit an auto W on at least Urgot on his way out. However, let's consider a few things. For one, as we mentioned earlier during our initial analysis, Ezreal is significantly weaker in skirmishes compared to both Urgot and Kai'Sa. Additionally, he is locked in short range versus these scary skirmishing champions and has no frontline around him. Considering all this, it's no wonder Doublelift didn't bother thinking about autoing anything and flashed to safety immediately, preserving his health pool. This was a great example of not bothering to auto in a tough situation in order to reposition as soon as possible. Not to mention, it was a damn solid E and flash to safety, putting both distance and terrain between him and the enemy. Now that he's created distance, Doublelift's priorities are to continue to hold this distance between him and the enemy while throwing Qs on cooldown and following up CC with his R, which he does as Hecarim ults in. Doublelift lands a sick KS on Kai'Sa as Hecarim kites away and Sion enters the fight. Notice how he turns back around to maintain his distance as Hecarim kites back and only walks forward when Sion and Vlad are in range. With his front line here, Doublelift continues to avoid autoing. He even eased forward on Victor just to stutter step back into his max Q range to avoid opening himself up to damage and lands another kill secured. With Victor dead and his frontliners in position, Doublelift can finally walk up for autos as he begins to chase down Urgot. At this point though, the fight is pretty much won. Bringing it back to the start of the clip, Doublelift probably knew he was pushing on a wave that he'd be overextended on, considering his team's lack of side wave tempo. He probably read that he'd get collapsed on, and that his tanky team comp would wreck the enemy in a counter collapse. If so, then Doublelift is confirmed as Sun Tzu. Anyway, that's it for this video. In part 3, we'll analyze how Doublelift wins another teamfight 4v5 with some pretty insane outplays around Vision. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time.